Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of Talking Point. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer on Hilal TV, for joining us, and I'll be in your company for the next 45 to 50 minutes. Now, this year was a very special year for a special organization, that is, of course, the Jamiatul Ulama of South Africa. They are celebrating 100 years in existence, and the organization has gone and seen through many periods, of course, the end of colonialism, the rise of apartheid and the end of apartheid, and of course the entrance into what is now a democratic South Africa. Joining me in studio to discuss 100 years of the Jamiatul Ulama, of course, why it started, the challenges that they went through, the challenges they are facing, but of course, the discussion on the syllabus and how, of course, it has become part and parcel of many of our madrasas within South Africa. I'd like to welcome Moulana Ebrahim Bham. Moulana, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah so much for making the time to come to us.
Wa alaikum salam and assalamu alaikum to all the viewers, and jazakallah for the opportunity.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Moulana, let's talk about, obviously, the starting of Jamiatul Ulama. It's 1923. We're nearing the end, of course, of colonialism within South Africa. Why was there a need for an organization like the Jamiatul Ulama to come to South Africa? Migrants are starting to come from India. Of course, we had before, slave laborers that have come on the ships of the British Empire. So we have the resurgence of Islam happening within South Africa. But it needed an organization like the Jamiatul Ulama to just be that custodian of us Muslims within South Africa.
1923 is quite an interesting. The Jamiatul Ulama in India, known as Jamiatul Ulama Hind, was established in 1919. So just 4 years before the establishment of the Jamiatul Ulama Transvaal at that time. It's an interesting part because there is no doubt whatsoever it was motivated and inspired by Jamiatul Ulama Hind. And the people who started it off were students of the stalwarts who served the religion in Jamiatul Ulama Hind. People like Sheikh al-Hind, Moulana Mahmud al-Hassan and Mufti Kifayatullah, who were in the forefront of the resistance against the British colonialists. They were the ones who established the Jamiatul Ulama Hind, and part of it was to oppose the British presence in India. And the people who studied with them came to South Africa, and motivated by that, they established the Jamiatul Ulama Transvaal. A year after that, the Jamiatul Ulama was established in Sri Lanka, known as the All Ceylon Jamiatul Ulama Hind. Again, seemed to have been motivated by the Jamiatul Ulama Hind in 1919.
And you can see such a similarity between South Africa and, of course, India, both of them being colonies of Britain. And again, the resistance, because it starts off as a resistance towards the British. And already there you can see that the Jamiatul Ulama is playing a social fabric within these communities.
Yeah, there's an interesting phenomena to look at, so to speak, the Muslim and the ulama organizations in what you would call the diaspora, so to speak. So yes, we know that there was an uprising from the Muslims, from the ulama in 1857 against the British in Shamli, in northern India. It failed for whatever reason. And then they realized that perhaps we don't have the resources to be able to completely resist physically and by arms. So they looked at different other strategies. And part of that strategy was not to cooperate with the British. And once, of course, quit India, do a social boycott, and do a boycott of everything to do with the Britain, they won't be able to govern the countries. Thereafter came a realization that we also need to protect our religious sphere and our religious beliefs, because there was, together with the British colonialists who were colonizing India, there was also the aspect of trying to take you away from a religion. We are superior to you financially, physically, by militarily, and also in thoughts. So then the ulama did take that particular step of protecting the thought pattern, the aqidah, the beliefs, and the practices and the values of Islam in the form of different institutions, and one of them was Darul Uloom Deoband. So that particular aspect of Jamiatul Ulama also came to play that role of a glue of the social and religious fabric of the society.
Moulana, during that time, of course, when you have the entrance of the apartheid government just after World War II, talk to us about whether there was a real suppression of religion. I ask that because obviously Jamiatul Ulama, and you would see so many Muslim activists or anti-apartheid stalwarts, of course, challenging the apartheid government. But were the Jamiatul Ulama still able to allow the practicing of Islam and bringing people and doing the dawah work?
Well, you see, when you start off, let me just speak about some of the people who were in the forefront. There were people like Moulana Waliullah, who was the first president of the Jamiat. Very interestingly, in 100 years, we had 5 presidents. And that says a lot with regard to the stability of the organization. And then there was a certain degree of lull in the late 20s. And then in the 30s, you had people like Moulana Muhammad Mia. Now, from what we read, Moulana Muhammad Mia was a real visionary. Someone who understood the challenges of the time. He established that time what we know as Mia's Farm, the Waterfall Islamic Institute. And he was very, very passionate about different types of knowledge. He used to go to the most progressive type of institutions, the schools, from private schools, learn and try to bring it into the Waterfall Islamic Institute. People still know very well about the discipline that he created, also know about the sporting talent that was in Waterfall Islamic Institute in his time. So he was a very great visionary. He was an alim. He was the president of the Jamiat. He was also at the Waterfall Islamic Institute. So yes, he played a very prominent role in trying to galvanize the Muslims into a collective force. Then, of course, in the late 1940s came the apartheid regime, and they established the Group Areas Act. And the Jamiat played a role. I mean, see, one of the things that, and it's very difficult to judge people according to what was circumstances at that time. By and large, Jamiat did stay apolitical. They stayed away from politics. But when it impacted upon religion, they took a stance. So one of the stances they took was to protect the sanctity of the mosques in the Group Areas Act. So in a landmark case, they went to the court and established the sanctity of a mosque. So what you would find very amazing is that Muslim communities were forcibly removed from areas, whether it be Fitas, whether it be District 6, and whether it be other places, but there was not one mosque that was touched. So there was a certain degree of upholding the sanctity of a mosque, and that was done by the Jamiat. So yes, they remained apolitical, which was sometimes a criticism leveled against the Jamiat, but yet at the same time, whenever it did impact upon religion, they did play a role.
And I want to touch on that in the next segment, Moulana, during the role that the Jamiatul Ulama played during the apartheid time. Moulana, obviously the history starts within the Transvaal province that was at that time, but it doesn't stay in the Transvaal province. It starts going and moving outside of that, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. My question is, why the Transvaal province? Was it just because of the migrant shift that happened from KwaZulu-Natal to Transvaal? And of course, the ulama at that time said, here's the starting roots of Jamiatul Ulama.
If you know of the South Africa of old, people were not encouraged, and they were discouraged from moving beyond the areas. That's why you had the Group Areas Act, where people were only allowed to practice religion. You could not go in the township and set up a mosque. You had to be under your own particular ethnic group as Indians, Coloreds, blacks, whites, living in different areas. And then by and large, most of the activities were focused internally. So you had 3 ulama bodies at that time. There was quite a bit of cooperation between those ulama bodies, but basically because of the circumstances at that time, they remained focused towards their own areas. So Jamiatul Ulama Transvaal, Jamiatul Ulama KwaZulu-Natal, and Muslim Judicial Council. And there are many areas of cooperation that followed in the later years.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Moulana Ebrahim Bham. We're going to be discussing the Jamiat's role in terms of the sanctity, the preservation of masjids during the apartheid time, especially when the Group Areas Act kicked in. And we're going to specifically focusing on an area here in Gauteng, what was then the Transvaal, and of course, what happened in the area of Fitas. Do stay tuned to Talking Point. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm still in conversation with Moulana Ebrahim Bham from the Jamiatul Ulama, South Africa. Moulana, I want to talk about fitas when I closed the previous segment. I remember Uncle Yunus from Solis Corner and Ashraf Garda in a documentary once mentioning just how the bulldozing happened and families were taken apart, but masjids were still kept. You mentioned 23rd Street off air. How is the Jamiatul Ulama able to make sure that the sanctities of the masjid, you spoke about it in the previous segment, that sanctity of the masjid, because the importance of it was preserved?
Well, we all know about the apartheid regime, and the apartheid regime was quite brutal. And they, for example, forcibly removed, and though there were people who resisted, but the resistance was not sufficient against such a militarized state. So even when people found it difficult to move, they had to move. So they were forcibly removed from nearly all the areas, whether it be Lodium in Pretoria, whether it be from Fitas to Lenasia, whether it be in District 6 in Cape Town, and other parts of the country. Even the small areas. Look at, for example, what happened in Klerksdorp, Manzil Park, and Mohadeen in Potchefstroom. They were all moved out where they were particularly in residence. The Jamiat did go to the courts to say that a masjid is always sacrosanct. Once a masjid, it will always remain a masjid. It cannot be demolished. Now, the apartheid regime was, sometimes, very confusing. You couldn't understand.
Yeah, yes.
On one hand, they were brutal. They had no human rights. They didn't take into consideration people's feelings, emotions in uprooting people. But somehow or the other, they did have a certain degree of what they felt was a fear of the Almighty.
Yeah.
So like that particular aspect of a mosque being sacrosanct appealed to one side of their religious sentiment. And somehow or the other, they kept the sacrosanct nature of the masjid intact, and they didn't bulldoze any of the mosques, even if they bulldozed the houses and they uprooted the people who were around the mosque. Yes, we can call it an enigma, we can call it something that doesn't make sense, but that is how it was. And Jamiat played a role with regard to keeping the masjid or regarding the masjid as sacrosanct and not allowing the masjid to be destroyed. And of course, there was also in Port Elizabeth, there was also a very, a very high-profile case, which stopped the highway from going across a mosque and demolishing a mosque with the intention of keeping the highway. And the Muslims went to court and they won the case. And even now, when you go to P, you see the highway coming to a particular place and stopping at that place just before the masjid.
Moulana, in the places where many of the Indian South Africans had settled in, and still it happens today, you look at the east end, places like Actonville. When you look at the south, Lenasia, you've got Azadville, you've got Roshni, you've got Lodium, you've got Lenasia, you've now got Fordsburg and Mayfair. The role that the Jamiatul Ulama played in, of course, the establishment of masajids, because those are your areas, and I'm just talking within the Gauteng province itself, the areas where the rich Muslim a history still remains. Talk to us about that, Moulana.
Well, you see, apartheid created certain things. Some people look upon it as positive. Some people will say, no, you cage yourself in. But what apartheid did do is, because you were forced to remain within your own areas, within your own people, you created an infrastructure within your own areas to protect your religion, your culture, your values. So yes, in that particular way, maybe there was a certain degree of protection of your religious institutes, your madrasas, your masjids. On the other hand, people will say that it goes against the nature of Islam, that you're not only supposed to be within your own self, you're also supposed to progress. You're also supposed to appeal to others with regard to the beauty of your religion, and that was not allowed. So you could stay within yourself, and in some way you did strengthen some of the institutes and some of your infrastructure, right? So you had a wonderful infrastructure. People used to come from abroad and look at those community infrastructures and envy it. whether it be your masjids, whether it be your madrasas, whether it be your different social and religious organizations working within the community, it was marvelous. But yet at the same time, we just look at after post-1994, for example, many a times people look upon it as something of the unknown. But what it did do was, all of a sudden, you moved into areas, and then there was a fear. Would you be able to protect yourself and your institutes and your religion in those new areas? And yes, we did it. And in those particular areas which were lily white, whether it be Greenside and Houghton, we not only established ourselves there, we established better masjids. And we created our infrastructure for ourselves in those areas.
Moulana, and that's where I want to come to next, because Houghton and Greenside were normally known as mostly dominated by European South Africans. It goes across so many other places. How was that able to happen? Not only in South Africa, can you see that actually happening? But that speaks, of course, of the beauty of our democracy, despite the challenges that, with the right intention and, of course, the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is able to happen.
Well, there's South Africa, the new South Africa is again one of the things that it's, on one hand, you have freedom of religion, which you don't have in many other parts of the world, especially when you look at Islamophobia in Europe and other parts of the world. You don't have that degree of Islamophobia here. Not that we should be complacent about it. We should take into account that there could be movements that could instill that particular type of Islamophobia in time to come. But yet at the moment, we don't have it. On the other hand, we all know about the degeneration in terms of infrastructure, in terms of governance, in terms of crime. It is something that we hope we need to put our shoulder to the wheel. Jamiat always believes in that. Jamiat will always tell people at the time of elections, go and register, go and take part in elections, go and play your role, put your shoulder to the wheel. It's not fair for you to take from this particular country and not give back to the country. And we have to make and put our shoulder to the wheel to the best of our ability. To me, one of the great challenges that is out there for Muslims is that in an arena where there is so much of corruption, where there is so much of dishonesty, and there is no integrity, we have an opportunity to go and show that things can be done with honesty, can be done with integrity. To go into those, reminds you of Hazrat Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, who said, Ij'alni ala khaza'in al-ard. The Quran makes mention, make me in charge of the treasury. So we have, in a time when people feel that the only way of doing things is corruption, maybe in the private, in the public sector, we can go and show people that no, you can do things with honesty and integrity.
Well, I want to take you back to 1994, because you were mentioning of air just the role that Jamiatul Ulama played. I know you guys said that you were apolitical, the organization was apolitical, but getting people to vote, because in 1994 there's a lot of excitement, but also at the same time there's a lot of mixed emotions as to where South Africa was headed. How did the Jamiatul Ulama at the time convince especially Muslim voters that 1994 was such an important time, and the difference that us as Muslims could have made in that
There was
communities?
no doubt 1994, there was a certain degree of euphoria, there was idealism. Sadly, those idealism has been many a times crushed by the incompetence of the government. And really it's sad, because really in 1994, people looked upon South Africa with great degree of idealism. We look forward to the people who have come at the helm of affairs, because they've gone through a struggle. They would be able to do things for the benefit of the country. They won't fill their pockets. They will look at the poor. They will go according to the Freedom Charter. Well, we all know what has happened. But that was the first time in 1994 that Jamiat entered into the political sphere. So we went into CODESA. We gave a memorandum, which is on record, of the religious rights. And what do we feel that how South Africa must be governed in the future. We met with political parties across the spectrum. We told the Muslims to vote. And what was good is it's not something that was new that we had to do. We had to just translate some of our ulama and scholars who have written books on the importance of voting and what voting means. So, for example, there is the Islamic view with regard to voting, a booklet that the Jamiatul Ulama had taken out at the time of the 1994 elections, which was mostly from the writings of the Grand Mufti of Pakistan, Mufti Shafi Sahib Rahmatullah Ali, the father of Mufti Taqi and Mufti Rafi Osmani, who spoke about the three different dimensions of voting and why Muslims, if they vote, how they should be voting and what should be the considerations in voting.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Moulana Ebrahim Bham. We're going to be talking about Jamiatul Ulama, South Africa, and its role in the global politics. We're going to be specifically focusing on Palestine and, of course, what had happened in Bosnia during the 1990s. Do stay tuned to Talking Point. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm still in conversation with Moulana Ebrahim Bham. We're talking 100 years of Jamiatul Ulama, South Africa. Moulana, let's go to the 1940s. It's just the conclusion of World War II. And of course, we start seeing many European Jews coming into Palestine and, of course, the formation of Israel at the time. The Jamiatul Ulama's telegram, because then and there, it already had its belief that Palestine and the area of Palestine and the country that it is should not be touched or annexed. Unfortunately, the complete opposite had happened.
Well, you see, there was, after the Balfour Declaration in the 1920s, there was a movement to get Jews to migrate to Palestine, right? And of course, they coined the term a land without people for people without a land. It is very interesting to find that particular, there was rabbis from Vienna, Muhammad Heikel has written with regard to it, that went over to see Theodor Herzl's the stuff that land without people for people without a land, and they sent a telegram back to the congregation, which was very interesting. They said the bride is beautiful, but she's married to someone else. That you are saying that there is no people in the land. There are people, there are indigenous people who are here. If we're going to come here, what is going to be the position of the indigenous people of the land? Although fleetingly there is a remark of that in the Balfour Declaration, that the people, they will come and set up their homeland, but in a way that does not impact upon the rights of the people who are staying there. But of course, that seems to be an afterthought rather than an objective in itself. So when the migration started of European Jews, the Jamiatul Ulama in the late 30s wrote a telegram to the League of Nations. At that time, the means of communication was telegram, and to the leaders of the Muslim world, to say that we look at with great alarm and great concern about the migration of European Jews into Palestine at the expense of the indigenous people. And it could come to a situation where they would be prejudiced. And that's exactly what happened. So in the late 30s, the ulama of that time had the vision to be able to see what was going to be the outcome, and they wrote telegrams with regard to it. And Jamiat has been, always been in the forefront with regard to helping people abroad according to our circumstances. Obviously, we know we don't have the power, we don't have the influence to be able to change things, but wherever we can, we try and make a difference. In 2002, after Jamiat started becoming involved in politics, we had a very interesting Justice for Palestine conference in the Indaba Conference Center. Now, that time people didn't know many, but it was a very high profile. George Galloway, for example, that time was very fiery on the Palestinian issue. He was the one that was invited by the Jamiat. That time David Makura, who was the Premier of Gauteng, he came and he spoke. Abdul Aziz Pahad, who was the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs that time, spoke. So we had a very high profile, the stuff of justice in Palestine. It was very well received. So the Jamiat then took that, even up till now. Jamiat plays an important role in helping in social welfare projects in Gaza and other places. So yes, we have always been in that. Then in other parts of the world, in Bosnia, when of course the Bosnian Muslims were attacked, the Jamiat sent a representative to go and see what is happening in Bosnia. They came back and said they discussed matters with Bosnia and said, don't only give us food to eat, to become obese, to be killed, give us some sort of protection. We looked at various ways, bulletproof vests, this and that. In Russia, for example, after Russia became free, after communism, throwing over the yoke of communism, there was a great shortage of Qurans. They never ever saw the Qurans. The ulama from that region wrote to the Jamiat and said, help us with the publishing of Qurans. The Jamiat made a collection, firstly within the makatib, within the madrasas, from the madrasa students. And they printed 300,000 Qurans in Russia. When there was a tsunami in Southeast Asia. Now what the Jamiat does, it doesn't have the capacity to become a disaster relief management team. But what it does is, it will go in after things have settled down and said, okay, this is what has happened, this is what we can do, and we'll take up something that will be long-lasting, which will be something sustainable. So we have done that in Southeast Asia. We set up a whole village. We set up a whole village in Pakistan after the floods. So Jamiat plays a role in social welfare, but it does something that is not disaster management related, but more on a sustainable manner over the years that can be there that for a long time.
Moulana, you're telling me off air, of course, you sat with the late President Nelson Mandela when the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, and you were saying that, of course, he was vehemently opposed to the American invasion of Iraq at that time.
You know, Mandela was quite amazing. I mean, a few incidents of myself I will make mention of. Once, you know, early in the morning, around about 7 o'clock, that time we still had the landline, and someone phoned and said that the president wants to speak to you. So I thought really it was like a gimmick, this was.
Yeah.
So after 5 minutes, he said he will be phoning in 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, the president came in and said, there's a media report that will be released this morning, and you know, in his own style,
yes.
that I have called Slobodan Milosevic to South Africa. Please tell your community that this is something that is not true. And the media have distorted the situation, and to reassure your community, I am well aware of what he had done to the Muslims and
he was the then Yugoslavian president. Yes.
And that, so there's a time of few things we had. At the time when he spoke out in his, against the invasion of Iraq, he had a very major press conference and he called some of the Muslim leaders, and I was part of it. And it's a very famous thing that he spoke very, very, you know, against American invasion. And as he walked out, some of his aides said that, you know, take it easy. He said, don't tell me to take it easy when there is injustice in the world. And we were part of that. We saw it. And once again, after that, we went again to present certain gifts on behalf of the Muslim community to thank him for his role in South Africa when I went with Ahmad Katrada and a few others at his house in Houghton. So yes, we did interact with him. He also came to speak at after the passing away of Maulvi Kachalia. Maulvi Kachalia is also related to me in some way because his son is married to my aunt. And he came to speak. And that time we were together, we sat on the same table. And very interestingly, I'll just give you a small anecdote. I suppose people were still very passionate about things. So there was the singing of the national anthem, but the national anthem only sang the first portion of the national. Right?
So no anti-blow fun.
Right. And he got up and said, that is not our anthem. Please render the entire anthem. So yes, that was some of the incidents that we had with Nelson Mandela.
Moulana, I want to talk about September 11th from an education perspective, because we have, of course, what had happened in the USA, and many Muslims in South Africa, and I personally experienced it going to a Model C white school where you have many of your white compatriots looking at you now very differently to what they were pre-September 11th. How important was education from a Jamiat's perspective to tell the people that we are Muslims and we are a peace-loving ummah?
Well, you see, the thing is now we all know about 9/11 in the sense that there are so many different theories that are floating about it. There's a lot of even casting aspersions upon the official version. I don't want to go into that, but of course there was a perception that Muslims were behind it. And sometimes people's perceptions are their reality, even if we know that there are different now narratives with regard to it. And that time we had to deal with it, and the whole Muslim world had to deal with it. And at that time the Jamiat took a stance that no, we don't believe in taking law into your own hands and going to bomb or do acts of terrorism. I'm not saying now that they were the ones that had done it. All I'm saying is that was a perception, and you had to deal with the perception. And the perception was this, and Jamiat did take a stance that we are not in favor of acts of terror in this particular manner, without conceding and without saying that Muslims were the people who were behind it, especially now given the different narratives that are out there. But yes, we still believe that no matter what your grievance is about governments or people outside, you cannot take the law into your own hands and go and do acts of violence. No, it's not according to the Sharia. It will be harmful to Muslims, and it is not according to what our ulama have given verdicts with regard to this.
Moulana, before we go to the break, we have a rich history of Muslim activists, anti-apartheid activists that really played such a significant role. I mean, I don't even know where to start with regards to them. And of course, they were there during the Jamiat's existence here in South Africa. How proud should we be as Muslims that we have seen our own people take the forefront against what was such an unjust system at the time?
You see, there is one aspect. I always tell people that when you speak about the history of an organization is 100 years. 100 years is a long period of time.
Yeah.
It's not even one generation. It might be 2 or 3 generations. In 100 years, look at what has happened. From 1923, you saw the end of the World War I. You saw the rise of colonialism, which was still there in practice. You saw the resistance against colonialism. You saw apartheid. You saw the World War II. You saw the breakup of the Soviet Union. You saw the breakup of the Berlin Wall, whatever. So in 100 years, there have been instances where people had taken different stances. You might agree with it, you might not agree with it. The reality is that there was certain degree of tension between the political activists and Jamiat. The political activists felt that Jamiat should have done more, whereas Jamiat felt we are a religious organization, we don't want to get involved in politics. But yes, that was a situation. But I think as a community, yes, we need to be proud with regard to the fact that there were people in our community that based on the Islamic principles of justice, they had fought against apartheid. And that is not only with regard to political activists. If you recently, the Jamiat at the time of its centenary had printed, had translated the autobiography of the great freedom fighter Moulana Hussein Ahmad Madani.
Yes.
Now Moulana Hussein Ahmad Madani was someone who was teaching Bukhari in Darul Uloom Deoband. But he was also a political activist and a freedom fighter who fought against the British. He went 3 times to jail. He was imprisoned in Malta for 2.5 years. And he fought against British imperialism. And one of the amazing things in his autobiography, he writes, he said, we as Muslims in India must rise up against British imperialism because India was the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. And if we do so, and this is something written in his autobiography, if we do so, then it will impact upon countries in Africa that they will become inspired to rise up against imperialism.
After the break, I wrap up my conversation with Moulana Ebrahim Bham. We're going to talk about the Jamiat as it is today, and of course, how they changed the syllabus in terms of accommodating the language of English, which is, of course, the most spoken language within South Africa. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. This is the final segment of my conversation with Moulana Ebrahim Bham. Moulana, obviously throughout the 100 years of the Jamiat, the changing of the syllabus, especially bringing in the English language to accommodate for, these new generation of kids going to madrasa. How was the Jamiat able to do that?
Well, you see, there is no doubt that there was a great amount of Urdu-centric type of emphasis in our earlier syllabus. We did the Beshti Zewar, which is a book of fiqh in Urdu language. And many a times people, maybe you might have some sort of recollection with regard to it. We taught fiqh through the means of Urdu. And when we came, close to 1994, we went one day to Mufti Mahmood, one of the great scholar, and we said that people are not understanding Urdu. What should we do? So there's a very interesting episode in this, So he said he was well versed with Sanskrit. So he said certain sentences in Sanskrit. And he said, do you understand? Samajh mein aaye? So we said, no, we don't understand this. So you're speaking a language which we are not aware of. So he said, how do you expect children to understand? I'm speaking in Sanskrit, you're not understanding. How do you expect children to understand a religion if you're going to teach them in a language that they are not familiar with? That's the time the Jamiat took the decision to move its syllabus into the English language under the Tahsil series. And that particular series, alhamdulillah, is not only used in 160 makatib in South Africa, but it is also used abroad in places like America, Barbados, UK. It has been translated in the Thai language, Spanish language, It is presently being translated in the Urdu language. So yes, that was the catalyst of how we changed from Urdu into English by an episode, and a very interesting one at that, with Mufti Mahmud Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh. Bear in mind, in the early 60s, most of the madrasas, you had very prominent ulama, but they used to teach individually their own kitabs. And that time, one of the rectors of the Darul Uloom Deoband, Qari Tayyib Sahib, came and he said, make your syllabus into one for the madrasas. And the madrasas, you know, the afternoon madrasas is something very uniquely South African.
Yes.
And not only has it kept the South African Muslims in good stead in keeping a relationship with the religion, but it has been exported worldwide, and Muslims throughout the world have benefited from the South African scenario and experience.
Moulana, what are some of the challenges that the Jamiatul Ulama is going through right now? There's been such great strides that they've made, but the challenges now that it faces as an organization?
Well, there are many challenges. I mean, firstly, you know, in terms of the strides, we have moved on even to set up an institute of higher learning, Darul Uloom, a Jamia. But that particular Jamia not only teaches people the Dars-e-Nizami, the curriculum which people become alims, but they also, for example, allowed to do university degrees if they have the aptitude and they have the ability and they have the passion for it. So now we have ulama who are graduating, who are, for example, well versed in B.Ed, in accounting, in law, and we believe that they will lend value to the religious landscape in South Africa, because they would go into these fields with a background of Islamic knowledge. We also have a situation in our Darul Ifta of creating experts. So we have, for example, one of our graduates who is now graduating and becoming an expert in ingredients in medicine, in medical ethics. So we want him to specialize in that. We want people to specialize in food technology. We want people to specialize in artificial intelligence. So we are looking at specialization, because this is it's an era of specialization. We all know, even in our doctors, even in our medical field, we now only have GPs. Although, I mean, the GPs played a very important role. Who will forget the role of people like Dr. Bulbulia and Dr. Jassat and Dr. Saluji, who played a role. But nowadays, very seldom do you go to a GP. You by and large go to a specialist. You know, so this is an era of specialists. We are looking at creating specialists. We believe that part of our challenge would be to reach out to the youth in a manner, in a context in which we can relate to them. And there's no doubt that they're facing so many great challenges. How do we reach out to them? First of all, they are entitled. They feel entitled. They have a very short concentration and attention span because of social media. How do you actually interact with them in the midst of so many challenges that they have? That is one of our challenges. That's how we want to reach out to the youth. How do we do it? We all find that traditional methods of imparting deen, while we have to continue with it, we also have to find different ways of reaching out to them, because they don't have the capacity to sit in a 1 hour talk the way previously we would have sat on a 1 hour talk. And we know these are the challenges that we are facing. We also have a challenge which sometimes maybe might be more exacerbated in South Africa than other parts of the world, is the disunity. So we have, even within the fraternity, the ulama fraternity, even people who are supposed to be, having one objective of propagating the deen, we all know the type of disunity that is in the ranks. From the Jamiat point of view, we will always be responsible. We will give responsible leadership. You will never find Jamiat entering the fray or entering the arena to be abusive to others. People have laid many different complaints and many different allegations. Many of them are completely so off the mark and so false. The Jamiat didn't go into a tit-for-tat. One of the reasons we said, if we go into a tit-for-tat, what's going to happen? The youngsters will look at ulama and say, ulama are fighting. Today they still say the ulama are fighting, but I think we need to rectify it by saying that the fighting and the abuse is from one side, not from the Jamiat side. So we will always provide responsible leadership. We will always endeavor to have pragmatic leadership. We all know the ideals. We all know the ideals of the Khulafai Rashidin, but we have to bring Islam and keep the iman of people not in an ideal situation, in a situation where we are. And what is a situation where we are? We have to keep people attracted and steadfast upon deen with social media. As much as we would like that social media goes out of the window by tomorrow, it's not going to happen. We have to keep people attracted and steadfast upon deen with artificial intelligence, with ChatGPT, and with all the different types of fitna that is there. But how do we do it? We have to look at ways and means to be able to reach out to our community and make them see that Islam is not based on a temporary time. It is eternal. Its values are eternal. It will always be there, and it has been there and will always be there. How do we reach out for people to see the beauty and the wisdom of Islam?
When you speak about unity, or the disunity that has been there, do you believe that unity amongst ulama can be achieved in South Africa?
Well, what I would say with regard to this is that we don't need unity of thought. Difference of opinion is healthy to a certain extent. One of our great scholars, Shaykh al-Hadith Hazrat Moulana Zakaria Sahib Rahmatullah Alayhi, who is very well known. He is the compiler of Fazail Amal, which is used by the Tabligh movement, which is known as Fazail, the virtue of deeds, where the virtue of salat and the virtue of zikr, etc. He has compiled. He has said a very beautiful statement. He said, wherever there is difference of opinion, and it is within the accepted sphere, there will never ever be fitna in difference of opinion. There will never ever be corruption. There will never be disunity. So when we talk about unity, we're not talking about unity in thought. We're not talking about unity in methodology. We're not talking about unity in opinion. We're talking of unity in purpose, in your objective. Everyone must realize there might be different methodologies, but we have one purpose. And the purpose is to see the preservation and the propagation and the progress of Islam. And that is one objective. So there we have to be united. We can differ in methodologies.
Moulana, one final question in what has been such a wholesome conversation. Moulana, you were telling me you were 35 years within the Jamiatul Ulama. That's as old as I am. I don't want to make you feel old, Moulana. But whenever we speak Jamiatul Ulama South Africa, Moulana Ebrahim Bham's name is always attached to it because of the more than 3 decades that you've been with the organization. And inshallah, we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps you going
Inshallah,
within
Ameen,
Jamiatul Ulama South Africa. But if you can take, what would be your personal highlight of being part of this organization? Just to close it off fast.
There's so many different situations, and I don't know what to make out. I mean, Jamiat has been in the forefront of so many different things. One of the things, in fact, I was speaking to a group of students just a week or so back, and I was telling them that create a passion for what you do. When you create a passion for what you do, then you will never work for the rest of your life.
Yes.
I said, I look forward to going to the Jamiat office every morning. It's something that I look forward. Many instances, I mean, one of the highlights perhaps would be that when we went to court to interdict a newspaper for printing the caricatures. And Judge Muhammad Jajbai was at the time ruling, and he interdicted the newspaper from printing the caricature. And it is something very, I feel very, and I hope maybe Allah Ta'ala grant him Jannah because of that.
Inshallah, Ameen.
So there were these type of instances. There was a time when we took a stance against the Qadiani movement, that there were those who believe. And alhamdulillah, we gained certain degree of success in that. So there have been many instances, but beyond that, it's just, I maybe don't like to look at the many highlights. It's just the day-to-day experience of trying to be of assistance to other people. I think that is a joy of working in the Jamiat.
Moulana, we'd like to say Jazakallah to you so much for making the time, for visiting us here at Hilal TV. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you strength and good health to continue the fantastic work that you are doing and just parting so much of knowledge to us, the Ummah here in South Africa.
Jazakallah so much for the opportunity.
No, it's always a pleasure. Assalamu alaikum wa
Alaikum
rahmatullahi wa
salam wa
barakatuh. Well, that's all we have for you here on Talking Point. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team, we will see you again, same time, same place next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.